Hi, I'm Nathan, and you're listening to the Queer Conscious Podcast. Imagine spending years of your life wearing a mask and just conforming to expectations that don't align with who you truly are. For many of us, we've experienced that coming out of the closet, but the energy it takes to perform, to pretend, and to suppress our authentic selves can be absolutely soul-crushing. I don't think we realize just how much energy it takes to put on a front like that. And that's why today's conversation is so powerful. My guest, Timm Baldwin, has lived that journey, and after decades in the closet, living a life shaped by faith and family and the expectations of others, Timm made the absolutely courageous decision to come out after having a wife and kids and growing up in a deeply rooted Protestant faith. Imagine having to come out to your kids. So wherever you are in your coming out journey, this conversation is going to be a beautiful reminder on just how far you've come and might even shed some light on places where you're still working towards being your authentic self, whether it's in your work life, family, relationships, or even in the queer community. So listen up and enjoy the show. Timm, welcome to the show. I'm so honored to have you here. How are you doing today?
I am doing great, Nathan. It's good to be here. Thanks for the invite.
Yeah, of course. And so I want to just jump right in. Let's start at the beginning. When did you first realize you were gay?
Yeah, like the $1 million question, right?
Do you always know? Is it just something you realize later? What was it for you?
For me, my story really started with other people, I think, realizing that I was gay even before I did. When I was in grade school, my classmates started to kind of hone in on some things and point some fingers and make some assumptions. And the word gay was used to describe me before I even really understood what the meaning of the word was. And so it wasn't until years later that I found myself kind of going, well, wait a minute, some of what they described and some of what they were calling me, oh my gosh, that might actually be true. And so I would say formative years, teenage years, I was in the thick of, like many young people, figuring myself out. And I knew very early that that was part of who I was. And because of my environment, I just decided it was too unsafe to do anything about it. But I realized pretty early.
Yeah. And had you ever told anybody about it, that you were having these thoughts or concerns?
Yeah. I can remember a conversation with my dad, of all people. And I think I was really at the time, this was probably like sixth grade. I was really at the time trying to navigate the names that I was being called and not really quite understanding what kids were seeing, being called things like gay, being called things much worse than that. And I went to him kind of in confidence. And so I think he was probably someone that I expressed a little bit of concern around it, but I never said anything to him like, oh, yes, I am, gay, or I am like, queer in some way. So while I think it was broached, it really never came out. And so I kept it a very big secret for most of my life.
Oh, wow. And your dad's a pastor, right?
Yeah, like an interesting part of my upbringing and my experience, and a lot of what shaped how I approached this whole thing was my family. So my dad, as you mentioned, was a pastor, is a pastor still. And he and his vocation kind of like shaped everything around our family, right? So church was twice on Sunday, once or twice during the week. It was at the center of everything that our family did. And so that experience kept me from an early age understanding, at least within the faith community that I was part of, that it wasn't safe to in any way be queer.
And so I was going to say, how was that conversation, just telling him, hey, these people are calling me gay, I have concerns?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's funny, like looking back on that, I'm not sure that, he remembers it. But for me, I think that it was kind of formative. And I remember being in tears. I remember being kind of upset. I don't think he made that big of a deal about it at the time. I think he kind of
Yeah.
dismissed it as kids being kids, because he didn't want to, any more than I did, right? He didn't want to believe that that was something that was there. And so I think we both got through that. And, since that point, we didn't talk about it. And there wasn't any indication. I did a lot of work essentially as a teenager and as a young adult to try to kind of compartmentalize how I was feeling and
Mm.
not pick at it and date girls and all of those things.
Mhm. Yeah. So you dated girls, right? So
I did.
eventually you compartmentalized the gay identity
Yeah.
and started dating girls, and eventually you got married. So what was that journey like? Did they know you were going through this as you were dating them, or was that just your little secret with yourself?
Oh, wow. It was absolutely a secret. And I had
Yeah.
done such a job on my own thinking to try and bury this part of myself. It wasn't safe. The church had kind of taught me that I really shouldn't be gay. I grew up in the 80s. And so that was at the height of a lot of things culturally and socially that were happening, including the AIDS crisis. And so being queer for a variety of reasons was just not safe. So I did this really um, deep fake on myself. I really lied to myself and just said, you know what? I am not this. Even when I had attractions, even when I found myself drawn to other boys, no, there's no way I'm that. And so I followed it. And as I got into high school and college, I did what teenagers my age were expected to do. I dated. I went to the movies with girls, and you know I was also really close friends with many of those girls. I mean, I think in hindsight, most of those relationships were more based on friendship than anything else. But I liked spending time with these, girls, and so I found that I was able to, in my mind anyway, able to kind of be the straight person that I thought I was expected to be. And so getting
Yeah.
married when I went off to college and met another friend, she was a great
Mhm.
friend, first and
Yeah.
foremost.
Yeah.
Um, you know, dating her was not really like dating. We were really just friends that hung out. And when it came time to graduate and move on from college, I thought, this is this is going to work out. I'm going to be with this woman and I'm going to marry her. This is what I'm expected to do.
Yeah.
And I loved her. I still love her. And so, it wasn't as though I felt I was, kind of faking any feelings for her. I just had this undercurrent of being attracted to men.
Yeah. This you say that so sinisterly, right? This undercurrent,
Well, and that's
right?
how it was presented to me. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was like, wait a minute, I can't be this. And so I was engaged in behaviors that were clearly, at the time I should have seen as like queer. I was interested in the men's fitness magazines and,
Mhm.
the kind of outward expressions of male sexuality, but I would never have seen myself at the time as queer.
Yeah. And so you really thought that you had achieved a straight life. You mean you were dating
Hmm.
women, got married to a woman, you compartmentalized this part of yourself. Was there any escape for you or anything that you felt like, oh, this is my time to like be with who I truly am? Was there anything like that?
I would say not so much. I mean, I think there
Mhm.
were relationships that I had in my life, very few. I didn't have deep friendships with a lot of people, but I had one or two male relationships, particularly as I got into my, kind of career and my working life that were close friends. And those relationships, those friendships were fuel for this part of myself that I
Mm.
didn't really want to admit was there. Like I was still kind of in very deep denial, even as a young married person. And I was very careful, though, to not put myself in situations where I might be with other queer people. I didn't know
Mm.
many people growing up because of the church and because of my upbringing. I wasn't really exposed to many people in my life directly that were gay.
Yeah.
And so I didn't have many role models or people that I could look at and say, there's a healthy relationship, there's a healthy individual,
Yeah.
they're out and proud, and it's okay to be that. So I just
And
kind
so
of
you
buried it.
avoided the queer community
I
too.
really did.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I
Okay.
think it
Yeah.
was, I think in some ways I had a lot of internalized homophobia. And I didn't want to admit this was part of myself. I didn't want to believe that it was okay, even if it was part of myself. And so I didn't really explore much of it. I had attractions. I mean, I could definitely look back and say that there were people that I was attracted to, and there were men in my life that I had grown kind of fond of, but I never really explored that in any way. And I certainly was careful within the, kind of space of being a married man of not kind of putting myself in a situation that I thought I might get compromised in some way. And so
Yeah.
I just kept everything inside like a pot that was boiling.
So let's talk about this pot because right, you're compartmentalizing who you are, these attractions. There's no escape or release. It sounds like you've done a great job, and I mean, respect to you for respect to your marriage and who that promise there
Yeah.
is. But what was it like to have that all inside?
Yeah. I think I didn't know how bad it was until it caught up with me. Years of doing this kind of mental gymnastics where you think a lot about what situation you're in, who's there, how are they going to perceive things.
Yeah.
I spent a lot of energy, I mean, exhaustive energy, just trying to kind of think through those situations. And I was never in a place where I felt like I could just be myself. So I was always thinking about everything. And so over time, that weight just got heavier and heavier, and the pot, kind of boiled faster and hotter. And it wasn't something that I addressed or even wanted to recognize was there until it got to the point that it boiled over. And I would say that, for all of the effort that I put in, right, this thinking and the compartmentalization, looking back, I'm sure there were people that probably looked at me and saw this part of myself very clearly, despite my best efforts or what I thought were my best efforts, they saw me for who I was.
Wow. Yeah. And who was that?
What's that?
Who was that they saw you for?
I think they saw something that I didn't want to see, right? Like they saw my sexuality. They saw that I was a gay man. They saw that I was in a marriage, that I was married with kids. And I think there were, quite a few people, although I don't know this as fact. I think there were probably quite a few people that saw parts of my personality, parts of my identity, and, maybe suspected that I was gay or suspected that I might be attracted to men. And that, just the thought of that was something that would have sent me at the time into a panic, the idea that anyone might think this about me. And I worked really hard. And the irony of that is that you spend all of this time and energy trying to convince yourself and convince other people that you're not who you are. And in reality, it's really hard, I think, to hide who you truly are.
And so at what point could you just not do it anymore?
Yeah, I mean, I went many years. I got married relatively young. I was about 25 when I got married. And, shortly after getting married, my wife and I started a family. And so we threw ourselves into being parents. Within a year of getting married, we had our first child. Within 2 years, we had two children. By the time year 3 or 4 rolled around, we had three. And so, I kept myself very busy for many years as a father and as a husband. And it wasn't until 2014, so about 10 years ago, the summer of 2014, I had been dealing with depression, and I've always been a person that's had a lot of anxiety. Although I think looking back, a lot of that anxiety was fueled by this exact thing. And I reached a point where I just was on the verge of a nervous breakdown. And I didn't realize that this weight was essentially catching up with me, and I couldn't do it anymore. So after carrying it for most of my married adult life, at the time I was late 30s. and should have been really living the good life as a married father. I was stressed, I was anxious, and I was broken. And so it just all literally came crashing down around me.
Yeah. And I think that's such a trap that we fall into before we're coming out of it. We think that we can hide it. We think we can fix ourselves. We think we can turn this around,
Yeah.
and it just builds and builds. And so for you, that was anxiety, this nervous breakdown. I'm
Yeah.
curious, well, like, what did that anxiety sound like to you? Like, was it thoughts about you being gay? Did it just manifest as other anxieties? Like, what did it sound like?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think for me, because I had really tried so hard to not address this part of myself, it came out in the form of panic. I had multiple, situations of having intense panic attacks,
Mm.
um, chest pains, the kind of classic symptoms of sweaty palms, difficulty breathing, feeling like I was going to die, like many
Wow.
times. And that went from being something that would happen every once in a while to something that would happen every month to something that would happen almost on a daily basis. And I was working and trying to kind of like be as high functioning as possible, but it was really difficult. And so the anxiety was really fears of death, fears of failure, fears of not being perfect, fears of letting people down. But I can tell you with almost 100% certainty that a lot of that was being fueled by this identity crisis. And yeah, I just didn't realize how much of that was catching up with me.
And it's crazy to think too, like coming out nowadays, so many people don't even bat an eye.
Yeah,
It's, I think coming out as even like, oh yeah, who cares? But I think people don't really realize that depending on the environment you grow up in, not everyone lives in a liberal utopia where they're flying rainbow flags,
that's
and
right.
that
Yeah.
it's actually, it feels like it's life threatening to come out. So,
Oh,
and especially,
absolutely.
yeah, and especially for
Absolutely.
you to have built a family on this, right?
For
So,
me, it definitely felt like that. It felt
yeah,
as though if I were to have said anything out loud, if I was to break this secret that I had, that it would be life ending. And, I definitely appreciate how much has evolved and changed in the course of my life. If you would have told me when I got married that gay marriage would have become something that our society would have embraced, I would not have believed it. And I didn't see that as a possibility. And so, having a family, having kids, the path that I saw to getting that was following this very kind of formulated, straight, existence, and everything around me kind of reinforced that. So
yeah.
I definitely thought that it was, kind of a dire situation. And in saying it now, it almost seems laughable, right? Because to your point, there are lots of people that don't have the experience of struggling with acceptance in their families or with their social groups anymore. And thank goodness for that. But for people of my generation and even older, right? Because I've talked with men in this situation who are 10, 20 years my senior, who are going through this actively right now.
Mhm.
It was pretty climatic, and it really did feel dire.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I believe that 100%. That was definitely my experience growing up. And it's particularly the religious upbringing, right? And when you're told, hey, you are going to be condemned in hell if you are homosexual,
Yeah,
that's a terrifying thought. And so I can't even imagine having a family and a wife on top of that and really building a life around a completely different identity and
yeah,
having to face that. So at what point for you did you decided you needed to do something about the panic that was coming up for you?
yeah. So I reached a point of breakdown. So I think I mentioned, I had this kind of building anxiety, this building stress. I was in the
Mhm.
car with my wife, and she was taking me to a mental health hospital, a pretty big one that's very close to where I live. And in the car, I was in tears, I was crying. I was literally just kind of broken, and she couldn't quite figure out what was going on. And she said, kind of in a moment of desperation, "What's happening?" And I don't know what happened in me in that moment, but I think I realized that if it was kind of a choice between either saying something and getting through this, or not saying something and having it literally kill me. And I just blurted out, "I'm attracted to men." And her first response was, "Oh shit, Tim." And that kind of moment was the watershed, kind of like the first kind of chink in the dam that I had been holding of all of this kind of emotion and all of these feelings and thoughts. And so that was when things kind of started. And it took me many years, even after that first admission. And I didn't even use the word gay, right? I was kind of so scared and still panicked about this identity that I wasn't willing to say with confidence, "I'm gay." But
Were you
that,
able to feel the relief from that at least, like
oh,
from that one
ab-
moment?
absolutely. I mean, there was a mix of both relief in that kind of like, I've said something, and she was the first person, right, that I said anything to. I had not talked to friends or, family or anyone. And so there was some relief.
Yeah.
But there was also the kind of follow up, the reality of like, whoa,
Now what?
I just said out loud that I'm attracted to men. What does this mean for me and for our
Yeah.
marriage? And I would say that it took us years, even after that, to really broach it. I think we had an initial conversation. I went through some therapy. I had been in therapy for many years, but I had not really dealt with this thing. I was dealing with the anxiety. I was dealing with the symptoms, right?
Yeah.
So the therapy wasn't really working. And now that I had said something, I could really kind of focus on, okay, well, this is the issue that I probably need to address.
Yeah.
But it took many years before we could have a conversation about it that was real and honest, and that would really help to move something forward. So we had the initial like kind of moment, and then we walked away from it.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until probably 5 or 6 years later that I was like, "I'm gay." And that was another kind of secondary moment of kind of like her hearing that word, me saying that word, and then it really becoming real.
Yeah. So in the meantime, those 5 years, what was the relationship like?
Yeah, the relationship is good. I mean, I think, that a lot of people ask me about that. How did I navigate a relationship with a woman? What was my experience like? It was great, actually. And the reason was because our relationship was always built on this friendship, this kind of mutual understanding. And it didn't really become challenging until I became really honest, which ironically was something that my wife had always wanted from me. She always kind of sensed, I think, in our relationship that I had been holding something back. She would ask me frequently, "What's on your mind? What are you thinking?" Kind of knowing that there was something behind the surface. And when I finally kind of, said out loud in these years later, "This is kind of what's happening and this is what I'm feeling." I think it was a moment where she kind of had to reevaluate some things, and I had to kind of go, uh, "This is kind of a part of myself that you haven't seen. I've been dealing with it all on my own." And I was tentative and nervous about how she was going to react. I didn't really know.
Yeah. And how did she react? At least to the first piece.
Well, after the initial "oh shit" moment, right?
Yeah.
I think she initially reacted well, but that I think was born out of the idea that I hadn't really said I was gay. I think she thought, I was struggling with my sexuality, but that my sexuality was more fluid, and maybe it was kind of bi or some kind of like broader kind of thing. And I think when I finally admitted, "I'm gay," that was where she had a little bit more of a crisis with it, and really kind of thought, well, where do I fit into that? If I'm, your wife, and we are, together, how does that work? And, in retrospect, having now gone through this years ago, although not many years ago, I've talked to many men, right, who are in this situation, men and women, who are in the situation kind of either midlife, later, married, who have kind of come to terms with this or are coming to terms with this. And I've found that the path of like how people navigate it is incredibly varied, right? Like some people, decide very quickly that separation or divorce is a path that they need to follow. Some people work very hard to recommit to the marriage and the relationship and find a path to, move forward together, that's very kind of like committed and monogamous. And some people, do all manner in between. And so we didn't know what to do, but I would say that she, in some ways, I feel like we switched places. She, for a period of time, went into a closet and felt some of the things I think I had felt for most of my life, of this kind of shame and this identity not really being something that was positive. And I think she experienced some of that to a small degree. And so now, years later, we've navigated it kind of as carefully and as, thoughtfully and as patiently as we could. I think my
Yeah.
process has been pretty slow.
Where are you two now in your
Yeah.
relationship?
So yeah, we're separated essentially,
Okay.
and still legally married. And
Yeah.
but we've essentially tried to stay connected as a family. I think we
Good.
still have some, maybe disagreements even at times about what a family looks like in this
Good.
kind of new normal that we have. But I think that, staying connected to her, staying connected to my kids have been a priority for me. And despite the fact that I really also want to lean into this identity, which has taken me years to kind of
Okay.
say out loud that, like, okay,
Yeah.
not only am I gay, but I actually would like to experience that. I'd like to,
Good.
be a fully out and gay man. And so the process of telling her and then subsequently telling other people took a while,
Yeah.
but it's been a good experience so far, and it's still a work in progress.
Yeah, I imagine. But I mean, just noticing your smile when you said that, I am gay, right? I could feel the levity
Yeah.
there. So I'm really excited for you. And, you know, I think just to go through that journey, 5 years in between that, trying to figure it out and figure out, are you gay? Is this something I can work with?
Yeah.
I imagine when you finally said those words, I'm gay, how did you deal with some of the emotions that your wife had? I imagine there might have been some guilt there, or
Oh, yeah.
maybe some feelings of selfishness. What was going on for you?
Oh, you just hit on it. I think that, you know, as much as I was struggling with anxiety, and that was kind of like a hallmark of how I felt for so many years, uh, in coming out and embracing this, which is still, like I mentioned, a work in progress, the guilt and the shame have been incredibly difficult. I've had a hard time forgiving myself.
What do you need to forgive yourself for?
Uh, I think the thing I want to forgive myself and try to work the most on in terms of trying to forgive myself is not being honest in the first place, right? If I had been able to face this in a way that was confident and, maybe as a much younger person, and really been able to tell my future wife before we walked down the aisle, this is who I am, and have her understand that and be able to make the choices that she would need to make in light of that. I think that's the thing I want to forgive myself most for. And it's been hard. The guilt and the shame that I carry is mostly around that. It's mostly around this hiding. And learning
Mm,
how to be honest, I have to say, has been the
okay.
biggest challenge in all of this. Saying I was gay was like part one, right? Like that was
Yeah.
like the first step. But learning how to face myself and to not, with a knee jerk kind of response, go to dishonesty or go to hiding or go to compartmentalization or any of the other things that I have done for most of my life. That work, I mean, no one really warned me that that was the work that I was going to really have to do.
Mm. Wow. It's I mean, I can't imagine going through what you're going through and feeling the guilt and the selfishness there. But it's like, from my perspective, like looking from the outside in, I'm like, give yourself for what? I mean, you were a young gay guy who grew up in the 80s in a strong religious family.
Yeah.
What were you supposed to do? Right? That it was really a life and death situation. Like you felt like that was the best that you could do at the time. So
Yeah.
yeah, I imagine that's hard though to really like accept fully when you're in the situation.
It is. And there were things around coming out that felt very scary. The idea of coming out to my family would have meant at the time a pretty good chance of some conversion therapy or some kind of reparative therapy. And that was not something I would have wanted in my life. I was really trying to do what was expected of me. And I think that the guilt and the shame, and letting go of that, that is I mean, I've said this before to some friends, it is a life's work for me. It will be the rest of my life kind of learning how to kind of shed all of these things and the selfishness, right? Because I was taught that anything that you did for yourself, anything that you embraced about yourself, any prioritization that you gave to yourself was inherently bad, right? That really you needed to kind of put everybody else ahead of yourself. And what
And
I
you're talking
learned,
religiously here now.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and
Okay.
and I think that kind of posture of always trying to think about others first. Ironically, I was always thinking about myself internally, right? Because I was struggling. I never really could think so much about other people, even though I was working really hard to please
Mhm.
and to meet expectations and to not fail and all the things that I kind of had ingrained in me. And those things were there to try to, I think, in some ways make up for this kind of part of myself that I saw as a shortcoming or that I felt, I was taught to see as a shortcoming. And that, getting through that has been the hardest thing. Saying I'm gay, accepting that I'm gay, that took a long time. And I feel like I've, checked those boxes. Affirming that it's okay for me to be gay, affirming that it's okay for me to think about myself and to prioritize my own needs, that is still very much a work in progress.
Yeah. And I'm curious too in that thought pattern of, if I put myself first, that's bad, right? That's not what you're
Mm-hmm.
supposed to do. What's
Yeah.
changed for you in that belief and recognizing the impacts of what's happened to not just you, but your family because you weren't able to put yourself first, right? What's
Yeah.
changed in that thought process for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's still a work in progress. But I would say that the biggest thing that helped me along and has really worked for me is realizing that by not putting myself first, by not addressing this part of me, I haven't really been able to show up authentically to anyone in my life. So I'll use my kids as an example, right? I've been a role model that hasn't really been a great one in the sense that I haven't really modeled for them what it looks like to show up as your full self and how to just confidently and comfortably step into who you are. And because of that, I think our relationship for many years was kind of challenged. It's hard to connect with someone, um, parent or otherwise, right? If you don't have that full person, if you don't know who you're really kind of engaging with. And there was always this piece that was missing. It's the same thing I was mentioning with my wife, where she would kind of poke me and say, "What's going on? Like what's happening in your
Yeah,
head?"
let me in. What's going on?
Yeah. And so I think because I kept so many people at a distance, or felt that I had to,
Yeah.
that really fractured a lot of those relationships. It didn't allow those relationships to blossom. And I think that the thing that I've realized is if I want to have those quality relationships in my life, friendships, romantic relationships, or otherwise, even work relationships, right?
Mhm.
Being able to put myself first and confidently address some of my needs. That is the thing that then allows my cup to kind of fill up so that it can overflow for other people.
Exactly. And I think that's where people take this idea of putting yourself first as something selfish and that it's a bad thing. But
Yeah,
when you get on an airplane, what do they tell you right in the beginning? Every time is
absolutely.
put on your oxygen mask first. You can't help someone. You can't give authentically if you're
Yeah,
coming from this place of scarcity. And I think for you to even realize that, oh, these relationships, I haven't even been coming from these relationships from a place of authenticity. So I'm
yeah,
curious, like, how has your relationships changed, especially with your kids now, being able to
yeah.
come from this place of authenticity?
It's it's changed dramatically, and I will have to say that my kids in all of this experience, I was so worried that they would reject me or that they might respond negatively to my sexuality. The exact opposite happened, and I'm fortunate that that happened. It doesn't happen like that for everyone in this situation, but for me, my kids have just grown up in such a different way than I did, and without a lot of the religious shame that I grew up with. They have embraced me. When I told my kids, there were jokes about, can we have a coming out party for dad, and can we help find you a boyfriend? Those are things I would have never expected from my kids, who are all now young adults, and being able to embrace parts of myself and connect with them around things that are part of queer culture. So sharing the latest dish on Drag Race with my daughter is something that can happen, right? And we do frequently. That I just would have never imagined that that could have been
Oh,
possible.
I'm like,
And
I can't even imagine what that would be like to know that your kid is helping you, wants to see you happy in a relationship and wants to help you find a boyfriend. Like, how does
yeah,
that feel to hear that?
it is. I can't lie. It's very heartwarming. It's in the stress and the anxiety of the whole process, of which there has been a ton, and the fractured kind of challenges that I've had with my wife, in terms of the conflict that we've kind of sorted through. It's been a real gift, like to have these people that I care so deeply about. Because I think if any of my kids had come to me early on and said, I just can't accept this part of you, I can't, see you for who you really are, I think it would have been very devastating for me. And I'm not sure that I would have had the same level of confidence and made the same progress, at least not in the same way, without that. And so I'm forever grateful for it. And I think that you know I still have some work to do with them to repair what I believe are kind of broken relationships, because I never really formed these deep connections with them, because I was so in my head. I was so stuck in this kind of hamster wheel of thinking, and worrying and panicking about who was going to find out or what was going to happen if something was discovered. So I just couldn't develop close relationships with them.
Yeah, and you
And I was
can't when you're in
worried,
your head, right? You're not present if you're just worried about how you're
for
being
sure.
perceived.
For sure.
So,
I would be at the dinner table, right? And I would kind of be literally in my own head, kind of quiet. And I wanted desperately to be able to engage with them, but I didn't even know where to begin because I couldn't accept who I was. And so everything was very surface. Everything was very kind of superficial. And
yeah,
so developing relationships with them now, um, is work, right? Because I don't have that foundation to lean on. I have to get to know them in new ways, and they have to get to know me in new ways. And I don't force any part of my life, my queer identity on them. I really try to let them come to me about it. If they want to ask questions, if they want to have conversations, if they want to discuss things, that's certainly something that I entertain. But it's been a gift. It's been a
yeah.
real kind of treat, and not everyone experiences that. So I'm grateful for it.
Well, I hope that they see how courageous you are, and I hope they see how powerful it was for you to come to an acceptance of identity, an identity that is so outcasted and looked down upon. And I hope they
Yeah.
see that bravery, and I'm sure they do. And it's why I actually reached out to you. I was like, look at this guy sharing his story online. And I was like, I'm curious, like, how did you even get the courage to start sharing about it on TikTok? I think that's where I found
Yeah.
you. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's not something that's for the faint of heart, I will say. And it wasn't something that I think, fully thought through when I started the process, but I'm kind of an avid social media consumer, right? I work in marketing, so I've always been kind of in that space. And I found platforms like Instagram and TikTok and others to be kind of engaging. And I certainly used them as like distractions in my own personal life. And I don't know, there just came a point where I realized I was struggling. I didn't have a very um, deep set of friends. I didn't have a community that I had built over years that, was kind of on standby for me because I was kind of so guarded. And so I needed to practice honesty, to be honest. It sounds like a little bit of a tongue twister, but yeah, I just needed to kind of put myself out there in a way that I could be accountable. And I didn't have many people in my life to kind of do that with directly. So I thought, well, let me just kind of start sharing more of my story. And I found that prior to doing it, I had connected with a number of people, men in particular, in the situation who were going through this. And there was such value for me in like hearing other people's stories. I craved it. I was like, I couldn't get enough. I would listen to podcasts. I would read blogs. I would watch anything I could get my hands on, read books, to try to understand other people's experiences and how they were navigating all of this. And I found so many different shades that I thought, well, maybe if I share a little bit more of me, I can kind of sort out for myself. I can look at myself kind of outside of me and see some of the things that I'm kind of falling into that I need to kind of change, and some of the things that I need to step more into. And so one day, this is probably December, it was like Christmas time. I just did a TikTok, and it was about being gay, and it was about being 40 something, and it was about everything that I was feeling and struggling with. And that led to another and then another. And before I knew it, there were people that were reaching out and saying, thank you for saying this, or me too, right? Like I'm kind of in the throes of this myself. Some of those people who had not even gotten to the point that I had of like telling anyone, right, that this was kind of a part of themselves that they were dealing with. And the more I did that, the more it reinforced for me uh, how important it was for me to be honest with myself. And it just kind of snowballed into, an experience now where I try to be as transparent and open as possible, the good, the bad, and the ugly, of which there is a lot in this experience. I'm not particularly proud of everything that I've done. I flounder quite a bit. And I think putting myself in a situation where I admit to that has been good for me. It's like I said, it's given me some accountability, and I think it's
Right.
helped to kind of give me a sense of where I need to keep working and where I need to keep pushing. And in some way, the kind of added benefit of it, which I never expected, was that
Yeah.
there's this community of people that have identified with it. And I don't even think you need to be queer, right, to identify with the idea of stepping into who you are, right? I
Yeah.
think everyone to some degree has that struggle of figuring out, is it okay for me to be who I am, no matter who you are? And maybe that's gay, maybe that's something else.
Yeah.
But that
Absolutely.
is
And I
big.
think for them to recognize too that there are parts of your story that help them to feel seen, like, oh, it's okay to feel this way. It's okay to want something different. It's okay to change my mind.
Yeah.
At 40 years old, it's okay to accept parts about myself. So yeah, I can imagine that that's really helpful and healing for people. I know it was for me to see that representation.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, just oh my gosh, there was one comment I saw that I got mad for you. It's like that I think you were talking about how you had this conversation with your wife and that you
Yeah.
had come out. And I think the comment said something like, wow, so basically you're just selfish. And I was like, Like
Yeah.
I was so upset.
Yeah.
I'm just like, and you responded so kindly. That was the thing.
Yeah.
Um, how did you even, if you even handle that
Uh,
hate, that
it,
disrespect?
well, I think that's a great question. And thanks for the encouragement and for the support. I mean, I think, the internet is for everyone. I think we've experienced this to some degree. The internet can be a very lonely and sometimes very mean place, where people can throw out all sorts of judgments and comments, and but in likewise, there can be great support, right? Like, and so I think what I tend to do when I get those comments, and it happens, it's not infrequent that people will say things like, "Well, you wasted her life." Um, you are selfish. You should not be this. You made a commitment, and therefore you should follow that commitment. All of those, I think, are valid things for people to say. I try to, kind of not discount them. The thing that helps me and that I usually respond with is, listen, any judgment that you might have as an individual behind a keyboard or a phone, who doesn't know really anything about the complexity and the years of internal torment that I have had. Anything that you might say is, believe it or not even a fraction of what I have said to myself, right? And so what I'm trying to learn in those comments, the kind of responses, partly, and I think mostly from people who have not lived this situation, um, but some who have. There are many spouses who have experienced this and have a lot of anger, understandably, right? I think that there's empathy for that, because this impacts not just me, right? This impacts everyone around me, and the same would be true for anyone in a marriage. But I think, steeling myself against these types of comments, learning how to thicken my skin, is a really important part of this process, because for so long I felt like a paper bag kind of blowing in the wind. Someone would say something, they'd think something, and I would kind of go in that direction. Oh, I think you need to do this, or oh, you should not do X, or oh, why don't you fill in the blank? And I would listen to it, like, as if it was the gospel. And these were people that were not close to me in my life. These were random people, strangers in some cases, that would say things, and I would kind of bend and kind of bow towards whatever those kinds of thoughts were. And I think for me to have success, for anyone really to have success in terms of building a life that you really love, it starts with trying to remember that those comments are gonna be there no matter what, and your identity is non-negotiable.
Yeah. Yeah. And I hope
So
people hear that, because I think a lot more people really live that way too, right? Letting themselves be dictated by other people's expectations, whether it's their parents, their friends, even the queer community, right? There's different
yeah,
expectations we want to
oh, for
live up to.
sure. Yeah,
And
I
I
think
think,
that I found
yeah,
coming out, like, for sure, like, people within the queer community had expectations of me that I didn't think I could meet.
what are some of those expectations you felt?
I mean, I think I found early on that I was a little bit of a unicorn, being someone who had come out late in life, gotten married. There were gay men who I talked with, some of whom, quite extensively, that just couldn't understand. How could you have done that? How could you have spent so many years in a relationship? What was the physical experience of that like? All of those things. And so, in one degree, I could kind of relate to other gay men based on my sexuality, but there was a whole host of things I couldn't. And the same would be true on the side of my life where I had straight friends who would say, well, I just don't understand what it's like to be queer. And I don't understand equally, like, how you could have been in a situation like you were in. And so that was why finding that kind of very specific, unicorn of a person who kind of knew, okay, wait, I too am a husband or a wife. I too have kids. I too have a lot of the same kind of challenges and thoughts. That was
Yeah.
really helpful. But I think in the queer community, right, there's expectations about how you dress, what you listen to, how you live, your political affiliations, all sorts of things, right? That we kind of have as like templated expectations. And at the end of the day, right, there's no one right way to be gay, just like there's no one right way to be straight. And I
And
think
that's I'm really
having that
glad we're
kind of,
having this conversation too, is because I think if people had a little more empathy and
yeah,
heard what you've gone through to get to where you are in terms of the panic attacks and the conversations and the holding everything in and compartmentalizing yourself, they would understand a little bit more why you did the things you did. And
yeah,
uh,
and empathy goes a long way, right? Like the idea that, I mean, we as a culture, as a society, we all kind of need a little bit more of it, considering how divided we are. And I would say that, you know, in recent years, it's been a little scary for me to be a person who has, you know, worked through some of this and still working through some more of it, and to see some of the kind of cultural backlash that there has been, for people of, you know, marginalized communities of all kinds, right? Not just
yeah,
sexuality, and and to see that kind of play out in real time is a little concerning. I will say I feel more emboldened and more empowered to speak up. I think, you know, the small, very small platform that I have to kind of be honest and talk about my feelings and some of what I've experienced, has been helpful for me. And I certainly have been humbled that it's been helpful to anyone else.
yeah,
But doing more of that, I think, is important. And the representation, you know, is it matters. You know, I used to think I was one of those people prior to coming out that thought, why does there need to be a gay pride month? Like, why does that have to be a thing?
I was one of
Um,
those gays before.
Yep. Right? Like, why do there need to be like, you know, parades, and why does everyone have to be so visible and vocal, and why do they have to be in everyone's face about who they are? And I realized in coming out, I totally get it now. It's not about forcing it on other people. It really isn't. It is about um, waking up, looking yourself in the mirror, and saying it's okay to be me. And for many of us, it takes a lifetime to be able to do that with enough confidence that you can walk down the street in a pride flag and say, this is who I am. And so now I have a completely different view of
Yeah,
that experience.
exactly. Right. When you can look at your life and be like, oh, wow, it took all this work to be
Right.
able to even say I'm gay. I get it now why we celebrate it. And I'm glad you brought that up too, like, because I think, you know, we all go through a phase like that too. I mean, most of us, where that pride, we it makes us feel unsafe. But I think it's because people are so outspoken and loud about it, it kind
Yeah.
of becomes a lightning rod for us. And we like, oh no, now I'm associated with this group. Oh no, now I'm vulnerable. Now I have to be seen
Right.
more. And you become
Right.
part of that. And it's scary and you don't want it. You can't be just like, you know, live happy little lives, you know, hidden and not make a big deal about things, because it challenges us to be seen in this world. And I think that's why it's
Yeah.
so scary for people.
Yeah.
But oh my gosh. But
Yeah. I
so
totally
Tim,
get it.
what are you looking forward to now? Now you are an out man.
Yeah.
What's there to look forward to in your life now? What's
Well, I will tell you that being an out man, at 40 something, almost 50 something, um, it's like being a 14-year-old. It's like being a teenager all over again. And I think that there are a lot of things, you know, sometimes I get asked the question, do you have regrets that you didn't come out earlier? And my response is usually no, not at all, because I needed to go through everything that I needed to go through to get to where I am. And I see everything that I've experienced as kind of purposeful, including my marriage, which I'm quite proud of. You know, the 23 plus years of being married, I see that as not wasted time, like some people on the internet might suggest. Um, I think that what I'm looking most forward to is the freedom to breathe a little bit more freely as me. And I've been such a wound up, pent up, tightly composed kind of person, so stressed and so anxious for most of my life. There are days now that I can wake up and pinch myself and go, I didn't obsess about what I was going to wear today. And I didn't think about what music I was going to play in the car and, how I was going to show up at work, where I'm, out and comfortable. That is not something that I could have ever imagined. If you would have talked to 20-year-old Tim or 30-year-old Tim, I was pretty sure that I was going to go to my grave never saying anything about any of this. And so, doing more discovery, self-discovery, what I've had to do, my life's kind of work, as I mentioned, of shedding the shame and the guilt and the and trying to forgive myself is coupled with this idea of who am I really? Because I worked so hard to be what I thought everyone wanted me to be, that I didn't spend any time kind of really digging into, well, which parts of me are actually me and which parts are the parts that I've kind of created because I thought someone or something wanted me to be that. And so that's what I'm looking forward to, is kind of getting to know myself. I will say loving yourself, as I have discovered, is not so easy. It's really hard.
It is, right? It's a fun catchphrase, but the active work of looking at those parts of yourself. First, I think figuring out which parts are you and which parts are not you.
Yeah.
Right. And I think it's easy to love the parts that other people love, but is that really you? And I think that's really important distinction that you just made. And then once you shed those, then you got to look at real you and the shadow part
and
of
then
that.
And then that when you get down to the, kind of the base level, you kind of separate everything out and you get down to, okay, this is who I am, is to say, okay, now I need to really love this. I need to really embrace this. And so the fun part, I think, is the discovery, putting yourself in new situations that you've never been in, walking in a pride parade or, doing something that you've never done before, and discovering how it makes you feel. That's kind of the kind of exciting part. The tough part is, okay, now the voice that's in my head, that's been there my entire life, that I've realized I'm never going to be able to silence fully. I just need to learn how to not pay attention to it, right? And I need to kind of realize that that's just a thought. That's a narrative, and it's not necessarily who I am. And who I am, as I mentioned before, it's non-negotiable. At the end of the day, I have to start figuring that out and then also really embracing it and loving it. Boy, is that hard work. I wish for anyone listening to this, like, it is not easy. You're not alone, because even the greatest self-help gurus out there, I think, would tell you that this is not easy stuff, right? Like, we all, no matter who we are, we all struggle with this to some degree. But if you can figure it out, and if you can take the journey and kind of make progress, it's really about that. That's another thing that I'm trying to embrace, this idea of progress and not perfection, right? Because perfection was what I was trying to live towards. And let me tell you, that did not work.
It doesn't really work out.
It does not. It's not advisable. I would not say that.
Yeah. And I hope that anyone can really take that message, right? You don't have to be married to a woman or someone from an opposite sex to really embrace that. Because I think when we open our hearts, when we're connected to other people, that's when we're really taking advantage of what this life has to offer. And so you don't have to go through these things alone. Well, thank you so much for your time, your wisdom, your vulnerability, sharing your story.
Absolutely.
Such a privilege to have you here.
Thanks, Ian.
Take care. Thank you for listening to the Queer Conscious Podcast, where we explore how love feeds us, heals us, and gives us life. I'm your host and queer love coach, Nathan Serrato. But remember that the conversations that we're having here today are not a replacement for working with a licensed therapist, professional coach, or mental health practitioner. These conversations are for entertainment and education purposes only. But if you are dealing with some big challenges and you're thinking about seeking some professional support, it is one of the most empowering things that you can do for yourself. You can visit queerconscious.com for more information on how to do that. Now, if you love today's episodes and you want more episodes like this, I need your help. please leave a 5-star rating and review. That's going to help me to bring you more high-quality content and interviews. So until then, take care of yourself and don't forget to let love in.